Writing is hard. Writing professionally can be very hard. Writing professionally for television can be harder still, especially when the studios you're writing for don't want to pay anybody. Solidarity. Anyway, when you're writing, say, a sci-fi action-adventure series, one of the most difficult challenges is creating compelling antagonists for your heroes to face off against. Drama, especially the sort of drama found in a typical episode of Star Trek, is driven by conflict. And if the bad guys can't at least give the good guys a run for their money, the conflict's not gonna be very interesting. Fortunately, throughout the many variations of the franchise, the writers of Star Trek have been up to this challenge and have managed to create numerous memorable villains which have brought us all years of entertainment for which the writers haven't been properly compensated because they've been getting screwed on streaming residuals. Let's take a look at some of the best villains who ever squared off against the lead protagonist of my favorite Star Trek show, Deep Space Nine, as we look to answer the question, who is actually Captain Sisko's greatest nemesis? Hope you don't mind if I get literary on you right away, but for a long time, I've thought of Captain Ben Sisko as Star Trek's answer to Odysseus. Not literally so much in terms of his story. Sisko never found himself away from home, having to make a long and arduous journey back. That sounds more like someone else. Instead, I compare Sisko to Odysseus because they're both such well-rounded characters. James Joyce loved Odysseus, or Ulysses, as Joyce called him, favoring the Latin version of the name. Joyce even wrote a novel titled Ulysses that I haven't read, and apparently many other people have read but not understood. One of the things Joyce seemed to admire most about the character of Ulysses was how fully realized he is. Joyce once described it this way: Hamlet is a human being, but he is a son only. Ulysses is a son to Laertes, but he is a father to Telemachus, husband to Penelope, lover of Calypso, companion in arms of the Greek warriors around Troy, and king of Ithaca. Like Ulysses, or Odysseus, I call him Odysseus. In the version of the Odyssey I read in college, he was Odysseus. To me, he's always been Odysseus. Like Odysseus, we are shown many sides to the character of Ben Sisko. Throughout the course of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, we see him as a son and a father. We see him as a widower and a husband. We see him as the commander of his officers and as their friend. We see him as an explorer, a warrior, a person of science and reason, and an object of religious veneration. And these various facets of Sisko's character are not briefly glimpsed in single episodes and then forgotten about. They are established, consistent but evolving aspects of who he is as the stories that comprise Deep Space Nine unfold. I realize that literary allusions to authors other than Shakespeare or Melville feel out of place in a video about Star Trek, so I'll just say that one of the smartest things the writers of Deep Space Nine did was create adversaries for Sisko who matched up to different sides of him. Each conflict between Sisko and the villains I'm going to examine here is rooted in a particular aspect of Sisko's character. For example, one aspect of Sisko that comes through especially strongly when compared to other Star Trek captains is his loyalty to the Federation and Starfleet and his dedication to upholding their ideals. I'm not saying Kirk or Picard or the other captains that have led series in the franchise aren't dedicated to the Federation and Starfleet, just that we don't see their dedication tested as strenuously as Sisko's is. Dude spends the back half of his series fighting a war against shapeshifters and their doomsday-looking foot soldiers. But before that happens, his dedication to what the Federation and Starfleet stand for faces another sort of challenge, an internal one. That challenge comes in the form of the Maquis, a band of separatists who renounce their Federation citizenship after their homes are ceded to the Cardassians by a treaty. Not only do the Maquis represent a difficult challenge to Sisko morally and philosophically, because, yeah, they were traitors, but they kind of had a point. From the very beginning, the conflict between Sisko and the Maquis is personal. The first Maquis leader Sisko faces off against is Cal Hudson in the two-part episode from Deep Space Nine's second season that introduces the Maquis, appropriately titled The Maquis. Cal is an old friend. He and Ben went to the academy together. They and their wives all used to hang out. Cal has seen Ben in lederhosen. They were tight, is what I'm saying. But after Cal is assigned to work with the former Federation colonies in the demilitarized zone, the ones transferred to the Cardassians, he sees how the colonists are being treated by the Cardassians, sympathizes with their cause, and ultimately joins the Maquis, placing himself squarely in opposition to his old buddy Ben Sisko. Forced to choose between his friendship with Cal and his duty to Starfleet and the Federation, Sisko chooses duty. He tries to convince Cal to return to Starfleet, and when that fails, Sisko intervenes to prevent the Maquis from attacking a secret Cardassian weapons depot and potentially starting a war. He succeeds, but the conflict between the Federation and the Maquis continues with Ben and Cal on opposite sides. Of course, Cal Hudson doesn't wind up being much of a nemesis for Sisko, all things considered. They have history. Former friends driven apart by their commitments to ideals and organizations that come into opposition with one another. There's definitely potential there, but practically speaking, Cal appears in that first two-parter that introduces the Maquis, and then he's never seen again. A few seasons later, it's confirmed that he was killed off-screen at some point. Sisko's real nemesis when it comes to the Maquis is somebody else. Somebody who was never a close friend, but whose betrayal of Starfleet seems to hit Sisko a lot harder and in a far more personal way than Cal Hudson's did. I'm talking about none other than this rat-faced, backstabbing, courageous champion of liberty right here, Michael Eddington. Just want to cover all my bases. Unlike Cal Hudson, whose friendship with Sisko is backstory we're merely told about, with Eddington we get to see his relationship with Sisko, as well as the other protagonists, develop as the show goes on. Eddington isn't a series regular. In fact, he's introduced at the start of Season 3 and only appears in 5 episodes before he's revealed as a member of the Maquis late in Season 4, but he shows up often enough to feel like a part of the team, one of the good guys. When Sisko is promoted to captain at the end of Season 3, Eddington is there to offer a handshake and a warm congratulations. When most of the station's senior officers are involved in an accident that temporarily traps them in Dr. Bashir's James Bond-inspired Holosuite program, Eddington works determinedly alongside Odo, Rom, and Quark to rescue them. Eddington also establishes himself early on as both a devoted Starfleet officer and a person of integrity. He establishes this, ironically enough, by betraying Sisko and sabotaging the Defiant in his second appearance in the series during the episode The Die is Cast late in Season 3. When Sisko disobeys orders from an admiral and takes the Defiant to intercept a fleet of Romulan and Cardassian ships en route to destroy the changeling homeworld, Eddington acts on secret orders from that same admiral and disables the Defiant's cloaking device, the idea being to force Sisko to turn back. But after doing what he was ordered to do, Eddington fesses up immediately, points out that he didn't damage any other systems on the ship, and promises to carry out his responsibilities to Sisko from now on. Sisko recognizes that Eddington was in a difficult situation under orders from a superior officer and all, accepts Eddington's explanation, and allows him to return to duty. Stand-up guy, that Eddington. The sort of fella a captain can really depend on when things get tough. An officer any commander would want to have on their never mind he joined the Maquis. In the episode For the Cause, late in Season 4, after almost 2 years of apparently loyal service as a member of Sisko's crew, Eddington reveals that his true loyalty is to the Maquis and steals a dozen industrial replicators that were meant for the Cardassians. Once the replicator theft has been accomplished, and Eddington has fled for Maquis territory, he makes one last phone call to Sisko. And Sisko's like, "Hey, hi, what's with all the treason all of a sudden?" And Eddington says, "Never mind that. I was just calling to propose a truce. Our problems are with the Cardassians, not the Federation, so if you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. Unless you keep trying to give replicators to the Cardassians, then we'll fuck you up. So, truce? Sisko's like, no. And Eddington says, oh my god, why are you so obsessed with me? The Maquis never did anything to the Federation. All we did was leave. Because the Federation gave our planets away to the Cardassians without even asking us first. And that's the real crime, isn't it? That we left the Federation? Because nobody's supposed to want to do that. The Federation is paradise. Why would anyone want to leave paradise? Y'all are worse than the Borg. Anyway, in conclusion, I have no problem with the Federation. And Sisko says, I don't care what you think about the Federation or anything else. You betrayed your oath to Starfleet, and you betrayed me. And for that, even if it takes me the rest of my life, I will get you. Already, at the conclusion of For the Cause, we see Eddington taking shape as a classic arch-nemesis. He betrays the hero, challenges the hero's philosophy. He argues that the hero is actually the misguided one, that the cause to which the hero is loyal is actually the evil side, while he, Eddington, and his allies are the true heroes. And he has a compelling argument on his side. The Maquis were formed in response to a treaty the Federation signed with the Cardassians that forced people living on planets in the demilitarized zone along the Federation-Cardassian border to choose between relocating to other planets or staying in the homes they built, but under Cardassian authority. Yes, as Eddington says, the Maquis are primarily opposed to the Cardassians since it's Cardassian troops who have been trying to run them off of those planets, but the Federation played a very prominent role in creating this whole situation. And now they're treating the Maquis like the enemy? I've done entire videos about the Maquis and about Eddington, so I don't want to repeat myself too much here, but in short, while it's complicated, and I think the creators of Deep Space Nine want us to see both sides and have to struggle with those complications, the point of view espoused by Eddington and the Maquis is a valid one, which it would have to be if Eddington is to fulfill his role as Sisko's arch-nemesis, or one of Sisko's arch-nemeses, at least. Remember, the Maquis, now personified by Eddington, is there to challenge Sisko's commitment to Starfleet and the Federation. And that challenge tests the very foundation of that commitment, the values those institutions claim to represent, and Sisko's own values as well. Sisko's determination to bring Eddington to justice for his betrayal of Starfleet crosses over into obsession in Eddington's next appearance, in the 5th season episode For the Uniform. While Sisko outwardly insists that he's after Eddington because Eddington betrayed Starfleet, he makes it clear to his closest friend, Jadzia Dax, that he's a lot more upset by Eddington's betrayal of him personally. Sisko tells Dax, Eddington played me. And what was my excuse? Is he a changeling? Is he a being with 7 lifetimes of experience? Is he a wormhole alien? No. He's just a man like me. And he beat me. Eddington turns his back on the institutions Sisko has spent his entire adult life serving, and he outsmarts Sisko in the process. And depending on how you look at the events of For the Uniform, Eddington's challenge to Sisko's values is successful, even if Eddington himself is ultimately captured. Remember, Sisko doesn't outsmart Eddington in order to capture him. He talks over the situation with Dax, realizes that since Eddington sees himself as the hero, Sisko's best move is to embrace the role of the villain in Eddington's story. Sisko says, I know how I can get Eddington. I'll do something so goddamn deranged, he'll have no choice but to surrender, to stop me from doing it again. And it works! Sisko pressures Eddington into giving himself up by poisoning the atmosphere of a Maquis planet and threatening to poison the atmosphere of every Maquis planet unless Eddington turns himself in. Eddington protests that most of the people living on the poisoned planet are innocent civilians who never attacked anyone, but Sisko's like, oh well, sucks to be them. Anyway, can't talk, gotta go poison another planet. Later! So Eddington gives up. Sisko gets his man, but at the cost of compromising his values, driving innocent people from their homes, and threatening to do the same to even more innocent people. True, Sisko's poisoning of the Maquis planet was an act of escalation. Eddington and the Maquis had previously poisoned a Cardassian planet in similar fashion, but Eddington is no longer a member of Starfleet. He has renounced his oath and is quite clear about the fact that he does not care about Starfleet's values or what it claims to stand for. Sisko does. When it comes to testing Sisko's values and pushing him to do what he has to do in order to defend the Federation and Starfleet, even Eddington's got nothing on the Dominion. In Season 6's In the Pale Moonlight, the rapidly accumulating list of casualties and defeats in the war against the Dominion drives Sisko to enlist former Cardassian spy Garrick to lend his expertise to what quickly becomes a criminal conspiracy to draw the Romulans into the war. Like his conflict with Eddington, Sisko's participation in the conflict between the Federation and the Dominion causes him to compromise his values in order to pursue what he believes to be a greater good. But with the Dominion, the stakes are so much higher. Sisko's pursuit of Eddington was, as he himself all but admits in For the Uniform, a personal vendetta. Sisko's actions in the Pale Moonlight, on the other hand, are done in the service of his country. His civilization faces an existential threat, and Sisko is doing what is necessary to turn back that threat and, if I may paraphrase the great Ernest P. Worrell, defend life in this quadrant as we know it. And what is necessary to turn back that threat? As Sisko himself puts it in his captain's log at the end of the episode, I lied, I cheated, I bribed men to cover the crimes of other men, I'm an accessory to murder, but the most damning thing of all, I think I can live with it. And if I had to do it all over again, I would. Obviously, the Dominion's primary threat to Sisko and to the rest of our heroes was a military one, and throughout the war storyline that dominates the last 2 seasons of the show, we see Sisko playing the role of a military leader. He commands the Defiant in battle. He is forced to abandon Deep Space Nine, then leads an operation to take it back. When the war is over and the Federation and its allies have won, Sisko is there on Cardassia, the home base of the Dominion in the Alpha Quadrant, alongside Admiral Ross and Klingon Chancellor Martok at the moment of victory. He's also there on Deep Space Nine when the treaty is officially signed, ending the war. The military challenge of the Dominion is an important one to the Federation and to Sisko personally, but in terms of the story and Sisko's character, the moral challenge presented by the threat of the Dominion is even more significant. That's why, I think, In the Pale Moonlight is not only widely considered one of the best episodes the series ever produced, it's also a more memorable show than any of those directly centered on the military conflict with the Dominion. Sisko does the things he does during In the Pale Moonlight. He makes those choices because, he thinks, the enemy he faces, the Dominion, leaves him no alternative. And when characters are making those difficult choices and wrestling with threats that challenge not just their freedom or their safety, but their philosophy, their morality, their sense of who they are, that's where you get real compelling drama. Of course, the Dominion isn't an individual, but an entire interstellar empire with the aforementioned shape-shifting leaders and army of gun-toting doomsdays, plus a fully staffed middle management corps, so maybe counting the Dominion as a single Nemesis is cheating. How could Eddington compare with that? The poor guy could barely pull off his Firefly cosplay. Who's he going for there anyway? Mal? Mal never had a jacket like that, did he? Could be Zoe. Anyway, before I move on to some of the other heavy hitters in Sisko's Rogues Gallery, there are a couple of lesser-known adversaries that test particular aspects of his character. For instance, remember her? That's Alixus. And just in case you do need your memory jogged, she is Sisko's nemesis during the 2nd season episode, Paradise. Sisko and O'Brien have taken a runabout on a survey of nearby star systems looking for potential colony sites when they find a planet with an unregistered human settlement. They beam down and receive a less than friendly greeting from a guy wielding a bow and arrow, which would be cute if not for the duonetic field surrounding the area that's disabling all their technology, including their phasers. Fortunately, Arrow Boy is soon joined by this guy, Joseph, who recognizes them as being from Starfleet and explains that the humans living here were supposed to settle on another planet, but their ship malfunctioned before they could make it, so they had to land here instead. O'Brien's like, well, we can get everybody out of here, no problem. But Joseph says, nah, we've been here 10 years. This is home now. You're home too, none may leave. What's that you said? Nothing. Hey, right this way. Joseph leads Sisko and O'Brien to the settlement, which has been fashioned out of the hull of their ship. They meet the colonists, and they seem like a good bunch. Simple farmers, people of the land. You know. They're greeted by Alixus, who seems like she's the HMFIC around here. There's some small talk. Arrow Boy, who is Alixis' son, it turns out, asks about his favorite soccer player, and Sisko's like, oh, he had to get a knee replacement a few years ago. He's the shits now. Sisko mentions the duonetic field that's jamming all their tech, and Alixis is like, yeah, so weird, right? Same thing happened to our ship and all our stuff when we got here. Must be a natural phenomenon or something. It's definitely not something I know anything about or have the power to change, if that's what you're thinking. While they wait around for someone on Deep Space Nine to notice they're missing and come looking for them, Sisko and O'Brien do their best to settle in with the rest of the settlers at the settlement. They get their own rooms and everything. At one point, O'Brien drops in on Sisko to find him reading a book, and Sisko's like, you know, at first I thought Alixis was some kind of cult leader, but it's actually far worse. She's a self-published author. Meg, one of the women at the colony, is seriously ill after being bitten by an insect. O'Brien suggests their medical kit on the runabout could help her. He and Sisko talk over a possible way to get around the duonetic field so they can contact the runabout, because otherwise Meg is probably going to die before the Starfleet rescue party arrives to get them. Alixis pulls Ben aside like, Ixnay on the Arfleet stay escu ray arty pay. I'm sorry, the duonetic field bricked my universal translator. What are you trying to say? Stop talking about Starfleet and your runabout and getting rescued. It's disrupting the community. And change out of that uniform. But Sisko does not change out of that uniform. He keeps it on, as does O'Brien, though they do throw in and help with the farm work. While they work, they see a man being released from a metal crate. Sisko's like, how long was he in there? Joseph says, since yesterday. O'Brien asks what he did to deserve such a severe punishment, and Joseph says he stole a candle. Sisko turns to Alixis like, let me make sure I've got this right. I'm not allowed to talk about Starfleet rescue parties and runabouts, but you're allowed to lock people in hot boxes for a day for swiping a candle? Alixis is like, a community can't function without rules. You're a Starfleet officer. I'm sure you've had to discipline people before. And Sisko says, yeah, but not like this. I'm the commander of a space station, not the captain from Cool Hand Luke. That night, Sisko is in his room when Cassandra, one of the other women from the colony, walks in with some oil like, hey, those muscles must be sore from all that work you did today. Want me to give you a massage? Sisko's like, no thanks. Cassandra says, are you sure? It'll make you feel better. And Sisko says, did Alixis send you here to give me a massage? With a happy ending? Did she send you because you're an Asian lady? Because that feels really culturally insensitive. Unless you actually are a masseuse. I mean, no reason you couldn't be, obviously. If I thought there was, then I'd be the culturally insensitive one. And that's not me, really. Even though I know how this must sound. And, no massage, thank you. Sisko goes to Alixis and says, hey, did you send Cassandra to my room to seduce me with a massage, which I presume was totally unrelated to her ethnicity? Alixis says, sure did. Sisko says, well, you suck. Where I come from, when we want to get someone on our side, we don't use sexual favors. We send in our shape-shifting chief of security disguised as a chair or something to spy on them and obtain incriminating information like civilized people. As punishment for refusing the massage from Cassandra and then getting all up in her face about it, Alixus orders Sisko to stand watch all night and then work his scheduled shift in the field the next day, which he does. Later, Alixus calls a community meeting to share some bad news. First, Meg is dead. Oh well, circle of life, what are you going to do? Second, O'Brien has been caught trying to get his technology working again instead of doing something productive, so as punishment, Alixus is throwing Sisko in the hotbox, because Sisko is O'Brien's commanding officer and therefore responsible for him. So, are they supposed to forget the Starfleet stuff or not? Because if they're supposed to forget the Starfleet stuff, it shouldn't make any difference if Sisko was O'Brien's commanding officer or not. But if they're not supposed to forget the Starfleet stuff, then why was O'Brien trying to get his tricorder or communicator or whatever to work such a big deal? I mean, I know Alixus is just doing this to try and break Sisko, but you know what might help? A little consistency. Sloppy work, Alixus. Is your writing that slipshod? Maybe that's why you never sold one of your books to a proper publisher. I'm just saying. After some time in the box, Alixus releases Ben and says, "Hey, you look thirsty and tired, and I'd love to give you some water and let you lie down and get some rest, but first, you gotta lose that uniform and change into these new clothes for me, okay, buddy?" But Sisko's like, "I have a counter-proposal. Bite me," and staggers outside and crawls his own ass back inside the hotbox because he'll be goddamned if he trades in his space pajamas for one of their background actor in a low-budget Jesus movie costumes. While all this is going on, O'Brien has snuck off and made himself a primitive compass and uses it to track down the source of the duonetic field, a device that's been buried in the woods outside the settlement. After outsmarting Arrow Boy with a childish ruse, O'Brien marches back into the settlement with his now working phaser, blasts Sisko out of the hotbox, and smartens up the colonists to what's been going on. The duonetic field that blocked all of their technology from working was not a natural phenomenon like Alixus said, but was artificially created by Alixus herself. Alixus openly admits it, and goes on to confirm that the problems which forced their ship to land here 10 years ago weren't accidents either. Alixus planned the whole thing so that they could settle here on an out-of-the-way planet with no technology and build a community according to her Luddite philosophy. Right about that time, Sisko gets a call on his reactivated communicator from Major Kira, who along with Dax has come searching for Sisko and O'Brien. Sisko offers to transport anyone off the planet who wants to go, but they all decide to stay. Alixus might be a cult leader, a liar, and a diarist with delusions of authorhood, but she did help them find a community together. And now that they know about the device controlling the duonetic field, they can decide for themselves how they want to live. Sisko's like, "Okay, suit yourselves, but Alixus and Arrow Boy, you're coming with us on account of all the crimes you did." Alixus doesn't match up against Sisko in terms of physical strength. She doesn't challenge his morality or his dedication to Starfleet. She battles Sisko in a contest of wills. She tries to bend him to her authority, to force him to accept her worldview, abide by her rules, do things her way. She's formidable. If O'Brien hadn't exposed her deception regarding the duonetic field, or if Kira and Dax hadn't come to the rescue when they did, who's to say Alixus might not eventually have broken Sisko's will? She may have merely been a petty tyrant, but Sisko was trapped in her domain. Speaking of petty, can we talk about this guy? This is Captain Solok. We meet him early in Season 7 of Deep Space Nine, in the episode Take Me Out to the Holosuite. Solok is the captain of the USS Tecumseh, a hero of the ongoing Dominion War who has been twice decorated for valor, a classmate of Sisko's from Starfleet Academy, and a conceited dickhead who is always talking shit about humans and how much they suck compared to Vulcans. When Solok's ship puts in for repairs at DS9 and he learns it will take a week to complete the necessary maintenance to the Tacumbra's warp core, he takes the opportunity to lay down a challenge which Sisko can't help but accept. Solok proposes that his crew meet Sisko's crew in the Holosuite for a baseball game. Oh, it is on now. This snotty jerkass is going to come into Sisko's house and call him out to play baseball? Sisko's game? Who does Solok think he is? A physically and intellectually superior person who, along with his similarly superior crew, has been playing baseball regularly on his ship's holodeck for months? Ha 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 ha! Yeah, Solok and his Vulcan team may have mastered the old American national pastime, and Sisko and his son Jake are both experienced players, of course, but the same can't be said for the rest of Sisko's crew. He assembles the best team he can, with Jake pitching, Nog catching, no wisecracks, Worf at first base, Sisko himself at second, which I think is neat since second is always the position I wanted to play, Kira at shortstop, Cassidy Yates at third, Lita, Ezri, and Bashir in the outfield, and Quark and Rom warming the bench. Their play needs work, but they're an enthusiastic bunch. So enthusiastic that about half of them wind up in the infirmary following their first practice. But hey, what's a twisted knee, a fractured skull, a torn rotator cuff, or a misaligned zygomatic bone, whatever the hell that is, against 24th century medical science, huh? Unfortunately, Sisko's single-minded obsession with beating Solok's team in the big game threatens to spoil that enthusiasm. When Rom fails to improve despite much practice, Sisko cuts him from the team. That causes the rest of the players, who aren't nearly as into this baseball thing as Sisko is, to consider quitting in solidarity. But Rom insists that they go on playing without him, and gradually, with more practice, their play starts to improve. Their play improves so much that when the game finally arrives, Solok's team, the Logicians, is only able to run up a 7-0 lead in the first 4 innings. Sure, the players on Sisko's team, the Niners, have been practicing their asses off, but except for Ben, Jake, and Cassidy, none of them had even seen a baseball other than the one on Sisko's desk until like 2 weeks ago. Plus, Odo's the umpire, and how can he be counted on to fairly call balls and strikes when he doesn't even actually have eyes? Those aren't eyes. That's just goo in the shape of eyes. This becomes relevant when Worf strikes out on a called third strike, which both he and Sisko think was outside, but which Odo insists caught the outside corner. Sisko argues the call, channels the spirit of Earl Weaver just a bit too much, and gets ejected from the game. But then, after Sisko turns the job of managing the team over to Chief O'Brien and takes a seat in the bleachers, something magical happens. Removed from the competition, Sisko is able to simply be a spectator and watch the game and remember why he loves it in the first place. After Nog and Jake complete an unorthodox play following a logician base running error to record the third out in the top of the 9th, Sisko turns to Rom, who has been cheering on the team from the stands this whole time, and has him go suit up. In the bottom of the 9th, with a runner on third, Rom comes in to pinch hit for Jake. He drops a successful bunt. Purely by accident, he's leaning forward, struggling to comprehend the signs he's being given from the dugout by O'Brien and Bashir. Fortunately, they were trying to tell him to bunt. Rom's bunt allows Nog to score from third, putting the Niners first and, as it turns out, only run on the board. The Niners charge the field and celebrate like they just won the World Series. Solok doesn't get it and complains to Odo, laying hands on him in the process. Odo doesn't like that, and he ejects Solok from the game, which I guess is over anyway. Later, the Niners are celebrating at Quark's when Solok says to Sisko, "I don't get why you're celebrating. You lost the game by 9 runs, and the guy who bunted in your only run didn't even know what he was doing. You're trying to manufacture a triumph where none exists." To which Sisko replies by raising his glass and shouting, "To manufactured triumph!" Sisko's conflict with Solok is even less consequential than the one he has with Alixus. At least in Paradise, there are some tangible things at stake. Sisko and O'Brien's freedom, the freedom and quality of life of the people Alixus has tricked into going Amish with her on that planet. In Take Me Out to the Holosuite, It's just an adolescent rivalry between two grown men who, as an evolved 24th century human and a logical, unemotional Vulcan, respectively, are, in theory, above this sort of thing. Solok doesn't threaten Sisko's life or his worldview or his values. He threatens Sisko's pride. That pride, ultimately, is the only thing on the line in this episode, and it's the only thing that needs to be on the line. Because this episode has no ambitions higher than being a playful change of pace from the super serious war stories that set the tone for this phase of the series. And because it's only Sisko's pride at stake, he's able to win despite losing. Solok and the Logicians defeat Sisko and the Niners in the baseball game, but Sisko ultimately realizes that it doesn't matter whether they win the game or not, as long as they have fun playing. He is able to unburden himself of the weight of this competition he's maintained with Solok all these years, and he emerges with his pride and his love of the game intact, having realized that sometimes manufactured triumphs are the ones most worth celebrating. One of the facets of Sisko's character I've mentioned only briefly to this point is his status as a religious icon, specifically the emissary of the prophets, which makes him a figure of much awe and respect among the Bajoran people. Sisko is ambivalent about his role as the emissary for much of the run of Deep Space Nine, but throughout the series, that role brings him into conflict with the official leader of the Bajoran religion, Winn. Winn is more of a foil for Major Kira than for Captain Sisko, but that doesn't mean she and Sisko don't have their dust-ups. They find themselves on opposite sides from the very beginning. Winn's first episode of the series, the Season 1 finale, In the Hands of the Prophets, centers on her efforts to close down the station's school, which she feels is too secular for the Bajoran students. Sisko opposes Winn's efforts and stands alongside Keiko O'Brien, the teacher at the school, Winn's more moderate rival Vedic Bareil, and ultimately the rest of the station's Bajoran residents, whom Sisko believes Winn is exploiting for her own benefit. The conflict between Sisko and Winn is mostly ideological in nature. Though she treats him with the same superficially respectful, condescending, barely masked contempt with which she treats everyone, Winn privately doubts that Sisko actually is the emissary. Eventually she accepts him as the emissary, but that ultimately only deepens their conflict because now Winn has to deal with the fact that the prophets have chosen an alien to be their emissary instead of a deserving Bajoran, someone like, Winn. Winn's opposition to Sisko as the emissary is fueled by jealousy. In Deep Space Nine's 7th and final season, Winn privately confesses that, despite her lofty position within the Bajoran religion, the prophets have never once spoken to her. She feels forsaken, ignored, and cast aside by her gods, who have chosen to make an outsider their representative. I get where she's coming from. I might even sympathize with Winn on this if she wasn't, just the worst. Winn is not the only nemesis of Sisko's to challenge him in the spiritual sense. The final adversary I'm going to cover in this video is someone who, at various points throughout the run of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, does battle against Sisko spiritually, politically, militarily, and beyond. Who else could I possibly be talking about but Gul Dukat? Dukat is Sisko's opposite number. Moriarty to Sisko's Sherlock Holmes, the Joker to Sisko's Batman, Barks to Sisko's A&W. What brand of root beer are they serving at Quark's, I wonder? Probably some cheapo Ferengi off-brand, like the outer space version of that Stars and Stripes they sell at the Dollar Tree, and those humongous bottles. How I remember those giant bottles of cheap root beer from when I was a kid, standing alongside the Great Value Ginger Ale and Dr. Thunder on so many picnic tables at so many disappointing cookouts. Not important. The point is, Gul Dukat, like Sisko, has many different sides to his character. Leader, subordinate, patriot, dictator, father, abuser, nobility, treachery, courage and brilliance, weakness and madness. We don't explore these many sides of Dukat as much as we do those of Sisko, because the show isn't actually about Dukat, even though Dukat thinks it is. But check it out. Dukat is Sisko's predecessor as commander of Deep Space Nine, or Terok Nor, as it was called when Dukat was in charge. He presided from what is now Sisko's office as prefect of Bajor during the Cardassian occupation. And in the early years of the series, it seems pretty obvious that Dukat would like to have his old job back, please. Soon enough, Dukat's ambitions grow beyond taking back control of DS9, and his desire to get his former office back is folded into his much grander scheme to either reconquer or destroy Bajor, and after that, with help from his pals in the Dominion, dominate their entire quadrant of the galaxy and beyond. It's at this point, midway through Season 5, that Dukat finally becomes a serious threat to Sisko and to the Federation as a whole. Before orchestrating Cardassia's entrance into the Dominion, Dukat had become almost an anti-hero. On the outs with the Cardassian government following a scandal involving himself and Zial, the daughter he fathered with his Bajaran mistress during the occupation, Dukat captures a bird of prey and becomes a rogue Klingon hunter. You're a Klingon hunter now? A rogue Klingon hunter, yes. But even before that, when Dukat was more antagonistic towards Sisko and the other heroes, he wasn't much more than the equivalent of the loudmouth who lives on the next block over, who's always coming around, full of swagger about some shit he did 10 years ago that wasn't all that great to begin with, but that he still expects everyone to be impressed by. He's sad and washed up, desperately clutching at a fraction of the respect he once commanded, a respect that Sisko seems to effortlessly attract from his peers and subordinates alike. Once Dukat negotiates for Cardassia to join the Dominion and has himself installed as the new leader of Cardassia, all of that changes. Now he has real power. Now he has the ability to inflict real harm on millions of people. Can you imagine if that happened in real life? A pathetic old has-been being elevated to a major political office? That's ridiculous. Suddenly, Dukat's not just some envious dude chasing past glories. He's the head of a hostile and heavily militarized state. When he contacts Sisko after announcing Cardassia's joining of the Dominion in the episode By Inferno's Light and declares that everything Cardassia has lost will be regained, including Deep Space Nine, those words carry weight. Sure enough, by the end of Season 5, Dukat has accomplished that goal, driven Sisko and the rest of the Starfleet crew off of Deep Space Nine, and reclaimed it for the Dominion, Cardassia, and himself. He only holds it until 6 episodes into the following season, but hey, nothing lasts forever. Dukat's role in the show goes beyond being an antagonist for Sisko. He's also frequently a foil for Major Kira, and their evolving, ever more complicated relationship is the basis for some fantastic episodes. But of all the adversaries the writers of Deep Space Nine place in front of Sisko, Dukat is clearly the best, and the one who represents the greatest challenge. He is Sisko's shadow self in many ways. Ben Sisko is a devoted and understanding father who loves his son Jake unconditionally and supports Jake even when Jake doesn't do what Ben wants him to do. Dukat is a manipulative and domineering father who outwardly seems to love his daughter Zial, but ultimately views her as an extension of himself and his own ego. Sisko is a leader who forms strong relationships with the people under his command based on trust, mutual respect, and confidence in the abilities of the people on his team. Dukat seeks positions of leadership to satisfy his sense of self-importance, refuses to take responsibility for his actions, and treats people under his authority as underlings who are expected to look up to him. No wonder he starts a cult eventually. And speaking of that, Sisko is a spiritual figure chosen by the enigmatic but mostly benevolent gods of Bajor, the prophets. In the final season of the series, Dukat becomes a spiritual figure as well, ultimately chosen as the emissary of the Pa-wraiths, the malevolent counterparts of the prophets. Here's how that goes down. After Starfleet retakes Deep Space Nine and his daughter Zial is killed in the Season 6 episode Sacrifice of Angels, Dukat is arrested and goes a little bonkers. Several weeks later in the episode Waltz, on the way to an appearance before a grand jury, The starship transporting Dukat and Sisko is destroyed by Cardassians, and Dukat and an injured Sisko escape aboard a shuttlecraft and end up spending some time together on a barren planet. Eventually, Dukat flies away in the shuttle, leaving Sisko behind and telling him Bajor is dead. All of Bajor. I want that Nancy Boy planet dead. I want its family dead. I want its house burned to the ground. I want to go there in the middle of the night and piss on its ashes. At the end of the episode, Sisko is rescued by the Defiant, and he says to Dax, referring to Dukat, from now on, it's him or me. That's some arch nemesis shit right there. After that is when Dukat starts getting in tight with the Paw Wraiths. He becomes possessed by a Paw Wraith in the Season 6 finale, Tears of the Prophets, during which he kills Jadzia Dax, killing the protagonist's best friend. Arch nemesis shit. From there, Dukat starts his cult, which we see in the episode Covenant in the first half of Season 7. Sisko doesn't really have anything to do with that, but that episode does start Dukat down the path for his final confrontation with Sisko. After the cult thing falls apart because Dukat can't keep it in his pants, he returns to Cardassia and undergoes cosmetic surgery to make himself look Bajoran. Then, beginning with the episode Till Death Do Us Part, Dukat, in his Bajoran disguise, cozies up to Kai Winn, telling her he has been sent by the prophets to be her guide. Pretty soon, Winn learns that her Bajoran guide is actually Dukat, and that they have become servants of the Paw Wraiths, rather than the prophets. After some initial reluctance, Winn is cool with it, because the prophets never spoke to her anyway, so screw them. Winn and Dukat also become lovers, and can I just say, good for Dukat. As repressed as she is, Winn must be a goddamn animal in the sack. It turns out the Paw Wraiths are imprisoned on Bajor in the fire caves, so Dukat and Winn get an evil book, and in the series finale, What You Leave Behind, they go to the fire caves to let the Paw Wraiths out. Winn double-crosses Dukat and poisons him as a sacrifice to the Paw Wraiths, but the Paw Wraiths are like, nah, we like him. And they resurrect Dukat and make him look like a Cardassian again. Then Sisko shows up for the final showdown. Dukat's like, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to release the Paw Wraiths from the fire caves, and they're going to burn Bajor, and then they're going to burn that dopey wormhole where those dopey prophets live, and then they're going to burn the galaxy, and then they're going to burn the universe. Isn't that neat? Sisko attacks Dukat, but Dukat's full of Paw Wraith power now, so he forces Sisko to kneel before him. Sisko's like, first the Dominion, now the Paw Wraiths. Why do you keep picking the losing side? Is it fear of success due to low self-esteem? Kai Winn is suddenly realizing she's on the wrong team, and she shouts to Sisko, hey, destroy the evil book! Dukat's like, shut up, and incinerates Winn. But while he's distracted with that, Sisko springs to his feet, tackles Dukat, and sends both of them, along with the evil book, which Dukat was holding, over a cliff and into the fires of the Paw Wraiths. Sisko finds himself in the white void of the wormhole / Temple of the Prophets, speaking to one of the prophets who appears in the image of Sisko's mother, Sarah. She says that the Paw Wraiths are imprisoned in the fire caves where they belong, and now Dukat is there with them. So happy ending! Except you're also staying here with us instead of going back to your family and friends. Congratulations! Personally, I've never been the biggest fan of the Dukat becomes the Bajoran Antichrist turn. I get it. I understand the writers wanting to craft a finale for the show and for Sisko that accounts for the whole of his character, and his status as the emissary is very important, something introduced in the first episode, so the series finale does need to pay that off somehow, and bringing Sisko's arch nemesis Dukat into that does make sense, but I don't know. I guess I always found the less mystical aspects of the Sisko-Dukat feud to be way more compelling. Regardless of how well it worked in my opinion, building up to Sisko versus Dukat in a winner-take-all fire caves match definitely serves to reinforce Dukat as the one and only answer to the titular question of this video. Who is actually Captain Sisko's greatest nemesis? It's this guy. The obvious answer, sure, but also the best one. If it's not Dukat, who is it? Weyoun? If Weyoun is Sisko's greatest nemesis, how come he's barely in this video? Petitio Principii, as Aristotle said. You really want to argue with Aristotle? Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is going to be, but before I do that, I want to give shout-outs to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Nick Martin, thanks Nick. Eric Hotch, thanks Eric. Matt, thanks Matt. Seth Taylor, thanks Seth. Todd Grassman, thanks Todd. Brandon, thanks Brandon. Thomas Kent, thanks Thomas. Don E. Stevens, thanks Don. Adam Maxwell, thanks Adam. Royce Murray, thanks Royce. Jessica Boyd, thanks Jessica. Mark Kidwell Pestana, thanks Mark. Don Glover, thanks Don. Peter Ferber, thanks Peter. Archer, thanks Archer. Aaron Wiggins, thanks Aaron. Christopher, thanks Christopher. Next, new channel members. They are Jim W., thanks Jim. Dan, thanks Dan. BB Rivera, thanks BB. Jason S., thanks Jason. F Prime 70, thanks F Prime 70. Akos Barati, thanks Akos. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics, and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon, or become a member at the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. If you'd rather give a one-time gift than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that by clicking the thanks button right below the video, or via PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, The Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Dana Cole, and Trek Reluctantly, the watch-along stream Dana and I do every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. As always, links in the description. Now, to next month's regulation Trek Actually topic. And can I just say, my patrons and members have been so good to me. I mean, they're always good to me. Like I said before, I couldn't do this without my Patreon patrons and channel members. But lately, with the voting on these video topics, my patrons and members have been very good to me. This month, I got to talk about Ben Sisko, my favorite captain. And next month, I get to talk about one of my favorite Star Trek movies. It's a movie I've talked about before, but next time it's going to be from a very particular perspective, and also a very relevant perspective in light of the recently completed third and final season of Star Trek Picard. The movie I'm talking about is Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, and the topic of next month's video is why The Undiscovered Country is actually Star Trek's best series finale. Can't wait for that one. That's next month. I'll be back then and a bunch of times before then, so until the next time you see me, whenever that is, thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.